I've never been so scared in my life to see my wife, knowing what she found and how calm she was, but yet so pissed off. Right. It was the scariest thing I ever dealt with. And, like I was freaked out. Right. Um, so, we dealt with that situation. Um, it was, all right, get out, go to a hotel. And as I was driving to the hotel, you know, I had to have a humbling conversation um, with myself. Usually when I'm driving, I have music blaring and everything like that. It was now turn the music off, have a conversation with myself, and then kind of talk to the Lord. And it was one, ask for forgiveness from Him, forgive myself. I messed up. I knew I messed up. And it was a very humbling conversation I had to have. One that was, there was no hiding. You know, I knew all the sin that I have done. I knew all the hurt that, I've just hurt the person that meant the most.
For men chasing purpose over comfort, this is the Intentional Guy podcast. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Intentional Guy. Every year I take about 4 weeks and I take 4 different guys from my church who I have come on here and share with us what God's doing in their life, share their story, because it's through stories and through relationships that Christ really sharpens us. Well, our verse on here is, um, iron sharpens iron. And that's what we're doing today. I want to introduce you to my friend Ebon Sharp. And Ebon, thank you for being on here. You can't get two different fellows than me and Ebon, okay? Because I grew up in Chicago, you grew up in California, just totally different cultures. Because I lived in the suburbs of Chicago, right? So I had nothing but cornfields around me, and my dad was a pastor, so I'm a preacher's kid, right? So we've been raised, and our lives are so different. But it's so funny how uh, I've known you for about a year now, and him and his wife Beth they started coming to our small group just not too long after you had moved here, really. Yeah. And it was the second night I think that we got together. I had this bright idea. Let's get to know each other. We're going to share our story. Everyone each week is going to share their story. And Yvonne shared a story, and I call it an anointing time because I saw where God showed up. Because you opened up to, I don't know that you even planned to do that, not, but you did. And it's amazing how our stories can connect with one another. And I know that your story today is going to help someone that's listening, because in the church that we go to, the slogan is no perfect people allowed, right? And me and Yvonne, we definitely qualify for that, right? Absolutely. But what I like about it is there's no judgment. And you never know what the person sitting next to you in church is going on. We don't know what goes on behind closed doors. We don't know the hurt, the pain, the hidden secrets that they're afraid anybody knows, because if they knew them, oh, they wouldn't like me. Sure. And I spent 15 years uh, battling shame and guilt. It was a tough time for me. And but Vaughn, I want you to go ahead and I want you to share what you feel comfortable sharing with us today about your story, because I really feel like your story is going to resonate with someone listening today.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, like you said, for me, like knowing where our friendship is now, starting from the small groups, if you would have told me before small groups that you and I would have been friends, I'd be like, you're out your mind. Like, yeah, I'll conversate with them or something, but
We have nothing in common.
yeah, and here we are. We meet on a weekly basis now. And it's been such a great relationship between you and I, between our wives, the rest of the small group. So it's been amazing. So thank you for having the small group because it's something the wife and I were searching for when we moved here. Um, I'm amazed that more churches don't have the small groups like what we have.
Right.
So
Because that's where real relationships are built.
correct. Yeah. So I guess to get into who I am, who my wife is, um, we we're high school sweethearts. I started dating my wife the very first day of my sophomore year in high school.
Oh, yeah.
I asked her out, and we've been dating. We hung out for the whole year before that. Her best friend and my point guard were kind of dating, and so we were around each other. I didn't let anybody know that I liked her. And then finally, my sophomore year, the first day, I asked her out. We started dating, been together ever since. So our story is, we went through high school. We ended up, my wife ended up getting pregnant her senior year, my junior year. And so my whole senior year, I was there. We had my daughter. Um, and, just that transition was difficult in
Right.
itself. So there's been a lot of trials and tribulations that we've gone through, but a lot of good times too. I don't want to exclude those. But there were, we were kids raising kids.
Yeah.
And while especially like during basketball season, I was a star athlete in high school. Beth was an athlete until she got pregnant, and
Right.
but when we would go to tournaments, we'd go to the mall and go to Foot Locker or something. All my buddies on my teammates, they're going in and they're buying tennis shoes for themselves, and I'm going in and I'm buying baby clothes or baby shoes. So it was a different world that I was in compared to them.
Right.
So I had to make that transition into fatherhood. But then again, I'm a kid still trying to be a kid, a high schooler.
Right.
And then, getting with that, I like to run the streets when I was young. And, I had older brother, I hung out with him and his friends. So, I was in the sixth grade going to high school parties. I was around all the gangbangers, all the dope dealers. And that was the crowd that I enjoyed as a kid. So growing up in that, I was guilty by affiliation. Never got jumped in any gang or anything like that. Other than this little small one that we kind of started, me and a few of my friends, but it was nothing major. But it was running the streets, going to parties, drinking at an early age, sex at an early age. That was my upbringing. Because I was hanging around with my brother,
Right.
At a young age, and so by the time I got to high school, I had already been hanging out at the high school and had the high school reputation and everything like that. Um, I got with Beth, and she was like, "Look, it's either going to be the streets or it's going to be me." So I was like, you know what? And early on, I saw that Beth was going to be a great mother, a great wife, a great provider in the house. So I was like, you know what? Let me go ahead and go this way. So I kind of steered away from the streets, playing sports, doing my schooling, working, because now having to provide for a kid.
Right.
My whole senior year, I was a dad. And then she graduates, and her graduation picture, she's full blown,
Really?
9 months pregnant. And then so, excuse me. Well, we go out on our own. I end up going to college. I played a little bit of JUCO basketball. I knew I didn't want to go off to college because I knew that would put a hindrance on Beth and I's relationship. Um, we transitioned into living on our own. We started out in the town that we grew up in, and then we ended up moving to Sacramento. And then, from there, I ended up getting my electrical degree and working for the railroad and kind of progressing my career from there. So every time we moved, it was for a promotion. So our story kind of takes us from Sacramento to North Platte, Nebraska, North Platte to Colorado, Denver, Colorado, Denver to Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Kansas to Virginia, and I worked in DC. And then, we finally transitioned here from there, more on a personal note, kind of one, the story that I'll be getting into. Two, we wanted to be close to the beach again. And then three, at the time, our grandkids and our daughter was living in Nashville. So kind of put us close to the beach,
Right.
and close to the grandkids.
Yeah.
And got me out of DC. So with that, everybody always sees like, oh, your high school sweetheart. Oh, that's amazing. And,
Right.
which it's in itself, it is a success,
Right.
because, there's other people out there that have made it being high school sweethearts, but then there's a lot that
Have not.
but then, I always tell people like when they're, in awe of it, I'm like, there's a road that was taken to get to where we're at, and it's not all been gravy.
Right.
So, getting into the story, I said I grew up being, with the older brother, sex, drugs early on, and that my upbringing was that men were to be womanizers pretty much. And so that's kind of how I was, even though I had my wife. If a pretty girl walked by, I'd, glance and look, and, not realizing that I was disrespecting my wife.
Right.
That. So it's taken a lot of learning for me. I finally kind of understand it now.
Yeah.
40 something years old, it took me that long to learn it,
Hey,
it was,
at least you learned,
yeah,
right?
no, definitely. And, so, I've always seen my brother and my dad do it. So that's what we're supposed to do as men,
Right.
and I didn't realize it, um, uh, pastor in Virginia, at the church we were going to had a slogan of bounce your eyes. And then, he kind of taught me that, and it's like, okay, if you see something that's going to catch you, bounce them, look away.
Right.
What's gonna, what's right, what's not right. Um, so to lead into the story, ended up getting in a situation in Virginia, where I put myself in a predicament because I didn't set boundaries.
Right.
There's many different types of boundaries, and I wasn't setting them. Beth had always told me, you got to make sure you got to be careful that, don't put yourself in a room with a female,
Right.
Emails, text.
Yeah.
You might think you're just being friendly, but, it can be construed in the wrong way. And at the time, me and Beth, we had a great marriage.
Right.
So we, obviously there was underlying issues, but I didn't realize them. On the outside, it looked like a great marriage, and it was a great marriage. I don't want to diminish that it wasn't. We conversated, we talked. We went through. She worked, I worked. We came home, and we had our time together. Sex was good. I wasn't lacking anything or anything like that. But in your mind, you start playing like, oh, the whole 80-20 rule. I have this 80 and I'm looking at this 20, and hey, what about that 20 over there?
Yeah.
And you're not realizing it's only 20%,
Right.
And, so I was confiding in a opposite sex, and, befriending a couple of females, and not realizing I didn't set the boundaries. So I opened these doors. And what started out as friendships,
Right.
ended up turning into full blown affairs. And not knowing that that's where it was heading, because nobody intends to, yeah, I'm gonna go out and do this.
Right.
It ended up happening. And it happened because I didn't set the boundaries. And, we're conversating, we're talking, I'm letting them in on, the things that are upsetting me, and,
Right.
I'm giving them the ammo to be able to say, okay,
Mhm.
I have feelings for you. Let me show you, how it would be.
Right.
The things that you're complaining about, you don't have to worry about over here.
Uh,
And so it kind of led me down this path that I didn't realize where it was going. I should have. Um, you know, Beth she's always had that like conscious voice and what female intuition.
right.
And if I had it, I didn't realize I had it. I didn't hear it. And so I would just go with the motion. Um, I ended up going down the path of two affairs. And it led me into a dark place. And then I got so deep that, I didn't even realize how deep I had gotten.
Right.
Um, you know, and it all started just because I was sharing and didn't set boundaries. So, that's one thing I want people to understand is you have to have boundaries. Because I always had the notion that, nah, you don't have to have boundaries. You don't.
Right. I think boundaries is really important because the problem is a lot of guys, we don't set the boundaries, right?
Mm.
And I think this is really critical part of your story that you're sharing right now, too, that I'm hoping that guys are hearing. We want to live off the cuff sometimes, and we don't see the harm,
Mhm.
right? With me and her are just friends, right? And uh, we set ourselves up for failure sometimes. So I really wanted to reiterate that point what
Yeah.
you're bringing out because I think that's really crucial uh, to your story. Because had you had those boundaries set up, had you listened to Beth,
Yeah.
we may not be having this conversation.
Correct. Correct. No, and we wouldn't. And the crazy part is she was, I talked about that female intuition and she was getting a word, I'd say it was God was talking to her
Right.
and preparing her. And she was sitting here trying to prevent this from happening, not realizing it was going on.
Right.
She was sending me little memes and TikToks and stuff, always talking about setting boundaries and, marriage things, just things to benefit us. And it got to the point where I was just kind of just not even reading them and just swiping them and
Right.
because one, I didn't understand why she was doing it, and then it started to sting because I knew the sin that I was doing.
Mm,
And so it was like, all right, does she know? And then
guilt, huh?
it was guilt. And that's one of the things I'll come to later, but I wish I would have confessed rather than her finding out. So to continue on with the story, it went on for a good year or more. And then finally one day, because I was getting texts and things like that, and I would delete them and everything like that. Back to that boundaries. If you're getting texts and you're having to delete them, or if you're having a conversation with somebody and you wouldn't want your spouse to know, I would say that is clue one that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I like the fact that in my relationship with Amber, I hide nothing.
Uh-huh.
If I have to hide something from her, that's there's a problem.
Exactly. And that's what I was doing. Beth had always had my code to get into my phone. She's always had access to my phone. But I was deleting the text. I'd leave the ones that were okay and the ones that were incorrect and I knew I was doing bad, I'd delete them. So one day, it was evening time. I'd come home from work. Um, we're watching TV. I fell asleep on the floor while she was sitting in the couch. And something prompted her to look at my phone. And when she went to look at my phone, she got this voice that said, "All right, I want you to look, but be prepared for what you're about to see." And she started scrolling through it and come across this particular female. She would have never, she had 100% trust that, this girl wasn't my type. Um, it was the furthest thing from what I would find attractive or anything like that. Um, she had 100% trust that there was nothing, but something told her, look at that text.
Holy Spirit.
Exactly. And she clicks on it, and all of a sudden she starts reading through it while I had forgot to delete some of the text. And she just starts freaking out, and I'm waking up to her freaking out, and she just started going off, and it was weird because she was going off, but she was yet calm,
Right.
which, like I said, I ran the street, I've been around the hood, I've been in street fights, all that kind of stuff. I've never been so scared in my life to see my wife, knowing what she found and how calm she was, but yet so pissed off.
Right.
It was the scariest thing I ever dealt with. And, like, I was freaked out.
Wow.
So, we dealt with that situation. It was, all right, get out, go to a hotel. And as I was driving to the hotel, I had to have a humbling conversation with myself. Usually when I'm driving, I have music blaring and everything like that. It was now turn the music off, have a conversation with myself, and then, kind of talk to the Lord. And, it was one, ask for forgiveness from Him, forgive myself. I messed up. I knew I messed up. And, it was a very humbling conversation I had to have. One that was, there was no hiding. I knew all the sin that I have done. I knew all the hurt that, I've just hurt the person that meant the most to me. The betrayal there.
So God really kind of smacked you across the face and gave you
a closed fist that He hit me with.
But you came up with the reality of, in that moment, I mean, you've known up to this point it was wrong. Let's just be honest. You knew that it was wrong. But in that moment, that's when
it sat, and because in the midst of the sin, I wasn't thinking about it.
Right.
I pushed that to the back burner, and kept my mind moving on other stuff, and so I didn't dwell on the fact that I was sinning. I didn't want to think about that.
Right. And now God,
now in this moment, it's like, nah.
God says you're going to deal with it.
About all of it, and I head into the hotel to stay the night in the hotel, and I knew if I spend the night in the hotel and not at home, her and I aren't going to make it through. And as soon as I hit the parking lot of the hotel, I turned around and headed back home. Went home, we talked about it. It was definitely, I sleep on the couch, she slept in the room, and and then we conversated and talked, and we talked through it. Not that it was all gravy or anything like that.
Right.
We had a lot to deal with.
Oh yeah.
And to unpack. So it was just something that we weren't expecting to happen in our journey. Even though I knew I was doing wrong, I wish I would have came out and told her and confessed to the sin before she found it on her own.
Yeah.
Because of the distrust, the brokenheartedness, to see my wife with the look of disappointment because of something I did.
I was going to ask you that because I think a lot of times, and some of the men that are listening right now, they, sometimes we get caught up and we easily can, like you said, push it aside. I'm not going to think about it. Go on. I'm getting away with this. But then when the reality comes, and because I know how much you love your wife, I know you well enough now that I know how much you love your wife, and to see her hurt and know that you caused that had to be devastating.
It was the worst feeling I've ever had in my life. And to see it on her face and the disgust in her face towards me when, I think she held me to a standard, This is my high school sweetheart, the love of my life, and to be the one to have hurt her in this way and to break that trust.
And that's probably been one of the biggest hurts she's ever experienced.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
And to know you caused that, it is devastating.
It is.
Especially when you're conscious of it.
Yes.
Some guys don't care, but you love your wife.
I do. And that's the crazy part, because this stemmed from something that was just a friendship, and it morphed into two full blown affairs.
But that's the thing. The enemy wants to destroy you.
Yeah.
And that's what the enemy did. The enemy was out to destroy you and Beth,
Yeah, no, he definitely was, but that's the grace of God, and the mercy that he shows us is something that was meant to destroy this marriage and this family. And he turned it around, and he's using it. I would have never thought I would be sitting here doing this podcast and telling our story. Beth was very nervous about it.
She was.
She's always wanted to protect my reputation and how people perceive me, and
well, that's the cool thing about Beth. I mean, let's talk about Beth for a minute. Because you're a blessed man. You really are a blessed man. And I remember when we were in small group, and that night that you shared your story, she was very gracious with it. And the amazing thing was, what I was watching with Beth was, she was worried about how we were going to perceive you. She's
still trying to shield.
Yeah. She's been betrayed. She's been hurt like she's never been hurt before. But her main reaction, and even to this day, coming to this podcast, because we went out to eat, and I asked him, hey, listen, I was scared, because I was like, how's Ebon going to take that? I really want Ebon to share his story on my podcast, but I'm like, I know this is not something everybody would want to come on a podcast and say, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, how he's going to do it? So I'm like, hey, Ebon, I got a question. He goes, I think I know where this is going. And I'm like, I don't think he knows. And I'm like, hey, I wanted you to be on my podcast. You're like, oh yes. You're like, I am in this. And I think God was already preparing your heart.
He was.
He must have already, because I know he prepared it in me. So he must have been preparing it with you.
No, absolutely. And, not to cut you off, but, that's that where God took something that was meant to destroy us and break us. And I think he's taken that, and he couldn't, he was putting it on my heart, like, you have a testimony, you and your wife have made it through one of the hardest things that
most marriages would not survive what you guys went through.
You know what? I'm out of here. You betrayed me. And Beth had every right to leave. And we had that conversation. Look, Beth, I understand that you want to leave. You have that right. But she was, we took vows, till death do us part, and through sickness and health, so
through the good times, through the bad times.
Yeah, and she's been that ride or die for me, that queen. And it was, she's just been absolutely amazing through it. It's definitely difficult for her. I don't want anybody to think that it's been easy for her or myself, just no.
I think you said there's trigger words and stuff like that.
One of the things with the betrayal that you end up having to learn, and there's things, I betrayed her. There's things that she found out through the text or asking questions, because when I got caught, I was 100% transparent with her. When she asked the question, look, you're asking the question, there's information there.
So I'm gonna be honest.
You got to be able to handle the information I'm about to give you, because you're asking. I don't want to hold anything from you. So she learned a lot of information. And
I had to be hard on both ends to even, because we would tend to want to shy, and I think
trying to
that's
sugarcoat it.
yes.
And this was one of those situations where it was not to be sugarcoated.
Yep.
I'm gonna give you the raw and uncut information that you're asking for.
Right.
So it was hard for me to give it to her because in that instance, I'm still trying to protect her feelings and her emotions
Mhm.
still. But at the same time, I know I can't. I need to give her 100% transparency. And then for her side, to have to hear the things that she's hearing.
Devastating.
She's already betrayed, and then now she's hearing this stuff. So now she's questioning, well, why wasn't I good enough, and things of that
Yeah.
sort.
Well, and her heart had to just be
Ah,
broken, you know, just
heavy, heavy.
I, I can't even imagine.
Yeah. No, I know how broken mine was, and I was the betrayer. So I can only imagine how broken she felt.
Mhm.
Um, but it was 100% the right thing to do to be transparent.
Right.
And that's what. So there's trigger things. I know that I had to learn. Okay, she's getting triggered by this. And it was like, okay, stay away from that. Or like having that conscious, because now after this, I learned, I hear that voice in my head. Hey, Beth probably not gonna like you to say that or do this, and it's okay, stay away from that. Anything that can possibly trigger her, I try to stay clear of, because it's not fair to her.
Right.
And obviously, if it's gonna be a trigger, then there's some connection for her.
Right.
There's certain songs that, will trigger her. So I hear that kind of music come on, I'll skip the song.
Right.
Just because, you know, it's a respect for her,
Right.
you know? Yeah, so it's a challenge to navigate through that.
So where did God end up in this and healing and all that? How tell us about that. I mean,
Yeah.
how did you this happens? How does God move you forward to where you guys are today? Because you guys, I call you a power couple. I mean, I just love how she looks at you, and it's amazing that you
It's
guys are where you are.
it's funny you use that word because, you know, people have told us that in the past. Oh, you guys are a power couple, and that's how we've always felt. When we go out or whatever, like we like the fact that people are drawn to us because we like to interact with people. And but I look back at how we were and where we're at now, and we're better today than we were then. And it was a process, and it's not easy. There's a lot of work that has to go into it. But again, you have to want it. And if you want it, you're going to put in the work.
Yeah. That's one thing I like about your story because I'm a big believer of what we pour in is what flows out, right?
Mhm.
And so now this happens to you, you're really conscious of it. And one of the joys that I have had with you and that night going out when we talked about the podcast, we also talked about our small group asking you to I wanted you to help co-host
Mhm.
this next season that we're about to do because one thing that I like about you and Beth is that I see you guys intentionally pouring into your marriage, such as reading books together, um, going to marriage counseling. I mean counseling, but going to marriage retreats.
Mhm.
And me and Amber were like, man, we were like when you guys came back from the one that you went on to, we were like, man, we want to do that. And that's where I talked to you. Hey,
Yeah.
why can't our group do this?
Yeah.
And
No.
as a group, we want to go we're trying to look up where can we go for a couples retreat and go as a group to that because just hearing the benefits from that.
Mhm. No, it's I grew up playing sports, and one of the things playing sports, you have practice,
Right.
and the practice is to get you ready for the game. And this is no different, in the marriage. You gotta put in the work to get ready for the game. And the
Right.
game is living that marriage day to day.
Yeah.
So what we I don't want to make it seem like I was like, okay, I'm all on board and we're gonna make this work.
Right.
It was a lot of times the men were very nonchalant and just dismissive,
This isn't manly.
Well, yeah, Beth was the one prodding at the beginning. But it was, first, when it happened, we were trying to find something, so I went to the pastor at the church that I went to, and, started, trying to get, some Christian counsel, from him, cause you want to stay away from going to Joe Blow, your buddy over here that's not a believer or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure, I was intentional on who was going to be giving me advice
Right.
on it. So I went to my pastor. He and I ended up creating a friendship, and he gave great sound advice. So he was pouring into me. And Beth was reaching out, searching for like a small group, but over there wasn't anything for our situation.
Right.
And which was astonishing to us, like we're not the only ones that have gone through this.
Right.
There's so many people that are going through this, that why is it not more readily available at the church?
Right.
So then we tried a Christian based marriage counseling. Then we started reading books. She started finding podcasts. That was a really big one. She found a podcast that the guy had done the same thing. He was in an affair, and they worked.
Right.
And so I was able to get great counsel from watching these podcasts.
Right.
And at the same time, Beth was able to get great counsel. Even though we were watching the same, and he was, more helping me. He's speaking to the terms of being the offender.
Right.
She was able to kind of understand some of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So those were great. Then she found Dave and Ashley from XL, the naked marriage, which that really helped her. And then she would forward me these, and I'd watch those. So podcast, books. We started doing a lot more reading. And that, one, I already wanted to start reading more, just to sharpen my mind more. I find that my vocabulary hinders when I don't read. And so I wanted to read, I'm moving up this corporate ladder, and I want to be, well spoken when I'm in the room with these executives. And but then it was, okay, you got this situation, you're going to read these books.
Mm-hmm.
So, which kill two birds, one stone. I'm reading, plus I'm learning about, okay, what do I need to do to better my marriage? The first book that we read was the 5 Love Languages.
I love that book.
Which for me, every marriage should read that book on a rotation.
That changed everything for me. Understanding, Amber is her love language is words of affirmation, and me, it's not enough to know it. Mm-hmm. You have to apply it too.
Correct.
And so I'm intentional. Every day I'm like, how, and I want to say every day, I try every day to say, how can I intentionally speak to her words of affirmation that will help her, and she's also acts of service, so something as simple as cleaning up the counter. The other day, I knew she was going to get up, I get up before her, and she was like, I got to get up early and make me a sandwich. I made her a sandwich, had it ready for her for work. Just those little things that fills her cup. And what? That took me 3 minutes to do.
It is such a minute thing, but yet
those small things,
such big dividends. Like that, just having a conversation with her. Hey, how was this? How'd your workout go?
Yeah.
Being intentional on asking about them.
Yeah.
Getting up, something as little as getting up and making her a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And just the dividends it pays out. It's just amazing.
It really does. So let me ask you a question too. Where was the turning point for you guys where you saw that God had finally, I know you guys you still deal with some of this, because I know that, like, coming to this podcast, Beth, she's worried, a little bit because she's worried how people are going to perceive you. I'm going to tell you right now, I perceive you as very brave and courageous in sharing your story with us because I know how that's going to help someone. Okay, but where was the turning point when you realized God's really got us, that we're going to be okay?
I think for Beth and I, it would at different times. You know, we were in the transition of moving here. I kind of alluded to that earlier. We wanted to be close to the grandkids and wanted to get out of DC where this had occurred. And so, we were in the transition of buying a house here. And, in a month's time, we kind of stayed with um, our daughter in Nashville until the house got built here. And just seeing how we were working through it there was for me kind of the start of, okay, this is starting to turn. It's still difficult and then still fresh. Because we dealt with it for a while we were in DC.
Yeah, because this doesn't just fix overnight.
No,
it's not a quick fix.
We're 3 years from it now, and I mean we're still working on it. Now, I mean, we're definitely way better off than we were. One, in our marriage, and two, in dealing with this situation.
You guys have been very proactive with it.
No, definitely. And, I have a wonderful wife that has truly wanted to make it work, and she was the catalyst to pushing this forward. So, she was that go getter of, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, and me as the male was very, all right, I'm gonna do it so it feeds her,
Yeah.
And then, but I would pick up these little nuggets, and this podcast that she sent and wants to talk about after we watch it, and I'm like, okay, there's something to this. So I would start, listening to the ones that she was sending me. I could still get better at being the one to go out and pursue and find a podcast for us to listen to. And I know that's something that Beth would really like for me to show that I am pursuing it. So I've been working on that, trying to do that, but I'm still not great at it.
Well, I noticed counseling with men and stuff. One of the hardest thing I have with guys is making them understand that, okay, so what you're doing right now, it's not working, right? So you got to try new things. And what I find, a lot of men don't read, and I'm like, you need to start reading. Well, I don't like to read. Well, there's a lot of things you don't like to do at your job, but you do it because it's required. Well, if you want to be this man of this character, then this is required. Reading, what you pour in is important to you. But I like what you said. I mean, I started off with Audible books. I had to retrain myself to read because I felt like I was stupid, and I had to get rid of that lie, right? But then listening to podcasts and just all the things that you said, it enriched me and, helped me. I mean, really helped me to walk in freedom again, and especially the enemy wants to keep us in shame and guilt, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And he doesn't want you to learn about the situation or how to better the situation. And by reading, like you're able to take somebody who has an in-depth knowledge of a particular subject, or you're able to hear other people's testimonies that have gone through it. What we ended up getting a book. It was The Love She Deserved and the Respect She Needs, and that book was amazing because it was the first time that we were reading all these books, and most of them are from the female perspective.
Right.
This was the first time I'm reading on the subject of relationship from a male's perspective. But yet he still ties it back to she's the queen, right? She's the important one. And it opened my eyes, just some of the nuggets that were in there. And that's the thing. Just you never know when that little bit of nugget truth is going to be dropped.
And it's amazing.
And when it hits you, you're like, oh man.
I've had podcasts where I've been listening to a podcast driving. I'm like, I have to rewind it again. And then, I mean, there was moments where I just felt the Holy Spirit just come over me.
I've had that situation happen where the Holy Spirit ended up coming over me, and I'm in the car by myself, and I'm bawling
Yep.
because I can just feel him. You know, I'm getting
Yep.
goosebumps. Yeah. And you never know when it's going to hit you.
No,
You really don't.
but you got to put yourself in the position. You've got to present those opportunities for those God moments. Because here's the thing, a lot of guys, they don't want to read or they don't want to turn on a good podcast. So what they're doing is they're missing out on a blessing on some things that can help heal what's hidden in the silence.
It's so easy to go back to what we're comfortable with.
Yep.
And, that uncomfortableness is us stretching.
Well, that shame and guilt wants us to isolate.
No, definitely. And then, I've heard Beth say it multiple times, and it didn't hit me till I actually noticed it. She could tell me something, and then I hear the same thing in one of the podcasts, and then the light bulb goes off. And it's like,
so many times.
and I think about my kids, I tell them over and over, and then somebody else tells them the same thing, and then they get it, and it's like, and that's what it was for me. Like a lot, the podcast would say something that she been telling me, and I'm like,
Well,
man,
and I have friendships that are that way, I think I told you about Blaine. Blaine approached me about something, and I was mad at him at first, but then I'm like, man, my wife's been saying the same thing, and so when I listened to him and said, you know what, I'm going to change this about me. I got addicted to how my wife was looking at me, and it's just real. Those things are, you got to put yourself in those moments. And you said it earlier. The boundaries are very important.
absolutely.
Boundaries are important. Friendships and relationships are very important. It's like you guys come into group. Do you feel like group has kind of helped you guys heal?
It's. I mean, I can't speak for Beth. I know for me, it definitely has because being able to tell the story, being able to talk about the situation or whatever, me being able to vocalize it has helped me with it, and it's helped me release the shame that I feel.
And hopefully you didn't feel any condemnation from us when you guys told the story. We were just, I don't want to say I wasn't like, at first, because I was like, but I remember I was like, how brave to share this with only knowing us for a week, But let me ask you another question real quick. A guy listening to this, I can't help this. Let's just be honest. We go to a good sized church. In our church, I'm sure there's some guys who are where you were. And if not in our church, that's listening to this podcast. And truth is, they're living a secret that their wife doesn't know about. They're hiding something. Could be an affair. It could be their addiction to pornography. It could be, gambling, drugs. It could be really anything, whatever captivates this. But I can't. But I know this. Your story is not unique to other people.
Yeah.
So, what would you say? Say something to the guy that's listening to this that is in the midst of it and he doesn't know how to, because the thing is, it traps you, right? How do you get out of that trap? So how would you help them with that?
Yeah, no, I would say definitely if you're in the situation or, possibly thinking about heading down that road, you might have some encounters. I would say definitely, if you're in the situation and it's still in the dark, I would say confess to your spouse. It's going to be difficult. Um, but that's one of the things that I wish I could change. One, I wish I would have never did it, but if I could go back to where I was already into sin, um, I wish I could bring it to light to her before she found it on her own. Just it's a different kind of guilt or distrust and a distaste for her.
Mm-hmm.
Her having to find out than me coming out and confessing.
Yeah. And if someone's listening to this, I know that someone is sitting there going, they're probably like panicking right now going,
Yeah.
you want me to go talk to my wife? And maybe if you can't, you need to go find your pastor.
Yeah. Correct. Find
And
that person
or that healthy person, like you
Mhm.
said, and say,
Correct.
this is what's going on. And I need to confess this to my wife. You don't have to do life alone.
Yeah. Correct. And I'll reiterate. Find that Christian based person, somebody that's going to feed into you healthy.
Yes.
Don't just go get your buddy that's going to agree with you and hot
Right.
you because you were out there
Right.
putting another notch in your belt. That's the worst that you can do.
Yeah.
Find that person that you can confide in that is going to fill you with like.
Because once you shine light, you're talking, you need to confess it because once you shine light on something, that's when the Holy Spirit can take over.
Yeah.
That's when healing can start happening. Yes, it's like ripping off a band aid. It's going to hurt,
Mhm.
but it's going to either hurt now and you can let God control the situation now and surrender it to God now,
Mhm.
or you can lose everything.
Correct.
And then light's going to be shined on it.
Yeah. Everything done in the dark will come to light.
It will.
And that didn't hit true for me until this situation happened. I've heard that verse multiple times, and um, you know, it was just a verse for me until it happened. And um, you know, it's it's going to happen whether you confess it now or down the road. And it might, you might get away with it for a long time. You might end up into another situation, but eventually it's going to come to light. So, I would suggest that you take care of it now. And the fact that you're bringing it up, there's a better chance that you're able to work through it. Whether, if you wait till you're found out, there's a lot less chance that you're going to be able to work through it. Not that it can't happen because it did happen for me, but it can happen.
And I think it comes back to what kind of man do you want to be?
Yeah.
What kind of man do you want to be?
And what truly means the most to you.
Yeah, because unfortunately, a lot of guys don't realize what they have with their wife until it's too late and they've lost her.
It's the whole 80-20. Why do you want to go after this McDonald's when you got steak and potatoes?
Yeah.
That's how I used to say it. And that's what I did. And that's, why would I even think about going over there
Right.
when I had this over here?
But it's because you didn't have those boundaries.
I didn't have the boundaries and that the whole complacency. You take what you have for granted, and that's where being intentional and understanding your spouse and understanding what their love language is and filling into them. And then when you fill into them, what you receive back, you're not even worried about that 10%.
Yeah.
Because this 80%, it's the big.
Yeah. Yeah. And I gotta say, I mean, my wife loves your wife. She just there, you can't help but love Beth. And what do you think your guys' future looks like? What do you see God doing?
You know what? God has been stirring with us, and especially because of this situation. Beth would have never thought about, you know, small groups. She was the one, she brought the conversation up, and I had been thinking about it, but I never really said anything. So I was excited to hear her talk about it. She wants to help women with this, to be able to deal with this situation. Um, you know, you look at the divorce rate in America, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's because they've normalized
Divorce.
divorce. You don't like what's going on, just
leave.
leave. And that's one thing I'm glad that she grew up with a family, and her parents were together 50 years. My parents are still together, and so we grew up in houses where longevity of a marriage was there. Now they had their own nuances, but
Well, unfortunately for you too, Beth probably doesn't see herself as strong, but she's a strong woman.
she's extremely strong.
And for her to, you know, to to fight for you and your marriage. says a lot about her.
I
You know,
definitely have a queen, a good queen.
you
You know,
do.
I always, always talk, when I'm talking with somebody, talk about like history. You look at all the great kings in history or the chess table. The king is the most important person on that chess table, but the queen is the most powerful.
Yeah.
And every great leader in history had a great woman behind them.
Mm.
Not that they were inferior, but they were there. They were the ones making that king great.
Yeah.
And that's what I truly have.
You do.
I truly do.
You do.
I'm definitely blessed.
And I just see a great future for you guys. I would not even be surprised that after this airs that, someone's going to come up to you and say they saw it. I wrote my book, and Ebon, there's hardly a month go by that I get a phone call from someone I haven't heard from in 20 years and say, "Hey, I read your book and I know what's coming next." They're like, "I was all over those pages." And they will confess to me some of the stuff that they're dealing with. And I see the same thing happening with you because um, you're open with, you're open with this. You're like, "Hey, I'm not going to hide."
It's definitely a vulnerability I've never experienced. But
But I think God's going to bless you for it.
yeah, I feel God tugging, and He's like, "Hey,
Obey the tug.
you have something that can help."
Yeah.
It's definitely a success story in the fact that it was meant to tear us apart, and here we are. We're still thriving together, and our future for that we see is to be able to help.
Well, you guys have such a great redemption story, you know, and God's grace is sufficient. It really is. And to s- to see that with you guys walking it out. I mean, me and Amber, we see a power couple. We see a couple. We're like, wow. We want. That's why we want to rub elbows with you guys. We want, and that's what's important too, is to have healthy friendships.
Correct.
And that's what I love about small groups. That's why I'm so glad that our church has a small group, for us to do, because it really is in relationships where life changes. You find change, right? And where someone that's listening to this is going through this thing, there, there's someone like Beth that could walk it with them. There's someone like you that can walk them with you. A guy can come to you and say, "Man, I'm right there," and you'd be like, "Dude, let's pray. Let's figure a strategy with
It's
this."
it's that whole you don't have to do life alone.
Yep, and I love that. So, uh, thank you again for being on here. You know, uh, sharing your story, your inspiration to us, and for you guys listening. Um, I just want you to soak this in. Where are you at in life? What are you hiding? What is it that you feel the enemy has you paralyzed at? Or what is that you're just acting like it's not existing? And, um, but it's really keeping you from being the man God has created you to be. And so reach out to us if you're one of those guys that you're like, "Hey, I need help." Um, that's what Intentional Guy is all about, helping other men to be intentional and overcome the strongholds that the enemy has on our life and to become the character and the man God's created us to be. So, Yvonne, again, thank you for being here. And to my listener, till next time, just keep being intentional.